First You Think is a not-for-profit ministry of the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. Support us at ucdsm.org today.
Many of us, I know, have a conflicted relationship with the Bible. That anthology of 66 books in the Protestant Bible, or 73 in the Catholic Bible, or 76 in the Orthodox Bible. And yet, this particular anthology of old writings, any of those three, is powerful and hugely popular. Bibles have always sold well in this country. You might think everyone in the U.S. has long since had one by now, and yet sales have not only continued at a brisk clip, with 9.7 million Bibles sold in the U.S. in 2019, but sales climbed to 14.2 million in 2023. And then, in the first 10 months of 2024, sales were up another 22% over the first 10 months of the year before. But buying Bibles doesn't mean people know their Bible very well. Time magazine observed in a 2007 cover story that only half of U.S. adults could name one of the four Gospels. Fewer than half could identify Genesis as the Bible's first book. I like to think that Unitarian Universalists could do better than that, but I don't have the data. A Gallup and Castelli survey concluded, Americans revere the Bible, but by and large they don't read it. Christianity Today wagged, Americans love their Bibles, so much so that they keep them in pristine, unopened condition. For many, apparently, the Bible is a sort of talisman, an object to possess as a symbol of tribal loyalty, not a text to study, to know, and to wrestle with. Or, and this may be part of what's going on with the recent boom in Bible sales, as more and more people are growing up unchurched, what they've heard of the Bible makes it seem like some mysterious source of truth, and in these deeply uncertain times, they get curious to take a look. But without a community and tradition to provide a context of meaning, without background on how the texts came to be written and how those particular texts and not others came to be canonized, they aren't likely to get much from their attempts to read it. But if we do engage the text and also the context, engaging the various interpretive possibilities in open discussion, the stories and the poetry offer us touchstones and wisdom as we seek to make sense of our lives and our world. 2 weeks ago, I talked about the book of Ruth as offering us a helpful inspiration to cross borders and make connections. I've spoken of the loaves and fishes story from the Christian Testament, and at Christmas we look at 2 different Christmas stories, and last Easter we looked at the 4 different Easter stories. There's a lot more to glean from this rich and influential anthology. In fact, I will be offering a class starting next Saturday, March 1st at 2 o'clock in the Mary Safford space in the back of this room. We will have 4 Saturday sessions, March 1st and March 8th, and then we'll skip to April 5th and April 12th. We'll be discussing and reading this book, Understanding the Bible, An Introduction for Skeptics, Seekers, and Religious Liberals by John Burens. Burens is a Unitarian Universalist minister. He was president of the UUA from 1993 to 2001. So let's plunge in and expand our appreciation and understanding of how to use this resource for understanding our own world. Get the book. Join me for the class. First, though, where does this notion of God itself come from? There are lots of theories. Here's mine. Our brains do their best to cope with this world in which we find ourselves. They rely heavily on predicting what's going to happen. Psychology researchers have been learning more and more clearly that the brain is not best understood as a stimulus response mechanism, waiting for some stimulus and then responding. That would be too inefficient, and often there wouldn't be enough time to figure out much of a response. Rather, our brains give a lot of energy to anticipating events. They plan in advance. They are prediction machines. And as the infant grows into the toddler, it begins to form concepts of belief and desire. People believe things, and people want things. This turns out to be tremendously useful in predicting how people, the most important features of our world, will behave, which allows us to coordinate our behavior with theirs. Apparently, conceiving other people's beliefs and desires comes first, and only later do we apply the process to ourselves and form a conception that we ourselves believe certain things and desire certain things. Beliefs and desires are a fiction. We might someday be able to make a complete map of someone's brain. It's 100 billion neurons firing across 100 trillion synapses, and to know just which neurotransmitters are passing along which of those synapses at what rate. But nowhere in all of that will we find such a thing as a belief or a desire. And yet these are indispensable fictions for giving us a rough and ready way to predict and get along with other people and ourselves. There is no other practical way to understand each other. We are made to relate to others as believing and wanting. We can't avoid it. We can, with training, avoid relating to the universe as a whole as having beliefs and desires, though we can't get along without imagining that people have beliefs and desires. We can get along passably without imagining the universe has beliefs and desires. We can do it, but I don't recommend it. If you are a physicist at work, or if you're reading an explanation of what physicists have concluded, you need to set aside any conception of the universe believing or desiring. But even the physicist gets off work at some point, and the exercise of imagining that the universe itself knows things and wants things is a helpful exercise for making us feel at home in this universe. We feel at home with people by relating to them as believing and desiring. Likewise, it helps us feel at home in this universe by relating to the world as if it believed and desired. We explore our place in the order of things by asking ourselves what the universe seems to believe about us and what it seems to want from us. Imagining the universe as a person, an entity that knows things and wants things, that has feelings like love and anger. It's a construct that can be helpful in pulling our whole humanity together, not just the logical left brain. And by engaging with that construct, playing with it, wrestling with it, it can put us into relationship with our world, with nature, or at least can help us cope with it. And so we come to God of the Hebrew Bible, the God of the Hebrew people. And probably every people have done, the Hebrews imagined the universe as having beliefs and desires. And the agents of those beliefs and desires are the gods, or as Hebrews came to conceive, the one God. The Hebrew God has some powerful positives. In the Exodus story, aka Yahweh and Moses' excellent adventure, Yahweh is liberation. He is sustenance, strength to rebel against oppression. Yahweh is covenant, the power of people to come together to be in community, to walk in a shared way of life aimed at transformation and healing and the realization of human potential to have and live in beloved community. But the Hebrew God is rather bipolar. Life itself is rather bipolar. The God of the Hebrew Bible swings between dishing out unearned grace and unearned wrath. And life does include a lot of pleasantness and unpleasantness that we didn't deserve or earn. The Bible, it's a lot. And there are so many fascinating stories in it and about how it came to be and what it might mean. I'm not going to try today to articulate overall the message of Buren's Understanding the Bible. We'll do that in the class starting Saturday. Nor will I make a general point about uses of the Bible. Instead, after the interlude, I'm going to take just one example of the way God is characterized. The hardest example. God at God's worst. The abusive God who appears most harshly in some of the books of the prophets. We'll see if even the parts of the Bible that are most likely to turn you off of the Bible entirely, if even those parts may have some use for us today. It will be difficult. And if in the end you decide that's a bridge too far for you to find any use for, I won't blame you. But let's give it a try and we'll see. And so for our interlude, perhaps something thunderous? The God of the Hebrew Bible is sometimes angry and punitive toward his people. Sometimes in life, it feels like the world is punishing you. The God of the Hebrew Bible is sometimes abusive. It's the prophets that express this abuse: Hosea, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah. These imaginative street preachers described for their listeners a universe that fits the profile of what we know about how abusers behave, casting Yahweh as the abusive boyfriend or husband with Israel as the girlfriend or wife. This description so resonated with the people of Israel that they made these descriptions scripture. My first semester of divinity school, every week on Thursday, I was in Old Testament class for 3 hours in the morning. And then I had pastoral care class for 3 hours in the afternoon. In the pastoral care class, we got to a unit on battering and abuse, how to recognize the signs of an abusive relationship, how that abusive dynamic works. And then in the Old Testament class, we kept talking about this Yahweh character who fit the profile of an abuser that I was learning about in pastoral care. Here are some of the aspects of the profile that we learned. Smashing things, like maybe Sodom and Gomorrah. Destroying her property, harming pets, like demanding animal sacrifices or perhaps the flood. Acting invincible, well, yeah. Putting her down, calling her names, humiliating her, making her feel guilty. Yahweh does all of those things to Israel. Unreasonable demands or expectations. Thou shalt not covet seems a rather unreasonable demand. Limiting her outside involvement, like when Yahweh commands, have no relations with the other people in the land. Embarrassing her in front of others, using the children to relay messages, threatening to take the children away, as in Ezekiel, your survivors shall fall by the sword. Here's one, using religion to control her. Degrading her about her relationships, abusing the children, treating her like a servant, that fits. Making all the rules, like pretty much the entire book of Leviticus. This Yahweh has serious power and control issues. Our pastoral care text said, extreme jealousy and accusations of infidelity characterize most men who batter. Yahweh is famously jealous, proclaiming in Exodus, "I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." And in such books as Hosea, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah, Yahweh repeatedly levels accusations of infidelity at Israel. Israel's unfaithfulness is described as sexual unfaithfulness and promiscuity. The accusations, the threats of public shaming in Hosea, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah are in the Bible. And those parts of the Bible are more graphic than I feel comfortable sharing with you out loud in a worship service. The abuse cycle, as counselors now recognize, includes episodes of tender seduction, honeymooning her, periodically recurring between the episodes of violence. And both phases, the manipulating tenderness and the dominating humiliation, are designed to assert and reinforce the abuser's power and control. And here too, Yahweh fits the profile. Hosea describes how Yahweh will humiliate Israel. And then Hosea continues in a passage I will share. "Therefore I will now allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. And there I will give her her vineyards and make the valley Achor a door of hope. There she shall respond as in the days of her youth, as at the time when she came out of the land of Egypt." Honeymooning, it's called, and it's a tactic of abusers. For a long time, the official Christian line on all of this was that God's acts were a fair punishment for Israel's sins. As our understanding of the nature of abusive relationships has grown, and we use that understanding to help us interpret the Bible, more and more people, including more and more Christians, are now saying there's not enough sin in the world to justify that much punishment. Jewish scholar David Blumenthal, in a book entitled "Facing the Abusing God," writes, "Abusive behavior is abusive. It is inexcusable in all circumstances. What is true of abusive behavior by humans is true of abusive behavior by God. When God acts abusively, we are the victims and we are innocent. When God acts abusively, we are the hurt party and we are not responsible for God's abuse. Our sins, and we are always sinful, are in no proportion whatsoever to the punishment meted out to us. Furthermore, the reasons for God's actions are irrelevant. God's motives are not the issue. Abuse is unjustified in God as well as in human beings." End quote. So what is the point of these awful stories? Yes, this world which we viscerally respond to as person-like, it does abuse us sometimes, and it abuses some of us more than others. How do we today make use of those stories? The answer, I suggest, is that we are called to social justice. Last week, we talked about the work of social justice that we do. We do direct service. We attend and sometimes may lead classes to educate ourselves and others about the issues. We organize, we advocate, we witness. Last week, those in attendance were asked to write on a sticky note what they've been doing or want to do in the coming year or in any of those 5 areas of justice work: service, education, organizing, advocacy, witness. And we put those sticky notes on the map that's at the back of the room there. And if you weren't here last week, I want to invite you to peruse that display and add your own sticky note or 2 or 3. And if you were here, but you've thought of an additional area you have or would like to contribute in, then please add another sticky note to our map in the back. One way that we can relate to those old stories of an abusive God is to move ourselves out of the role of the abused partner and into a role of ministering to the abuser. The call to social justice is a call to minister to God. In that pastoral care class I mentioned, we talked about some ways to minister to victims of abuse, and we also talked about the appropriate responses for a minister when the abuser himself comes to see you or you see him. How do you minister to an abuser? Our pastoral care textbook stressed accountability, holding the abuser accountable. In our social justice work, we seek to hold accountable the sources of injustice. The appropriate frame, our textbook said, is that the abuser has committed a criminal act, and he should not be allowed to evade the consequences of this behavior. He may be asking for forgiveness, but forgiveness is not appropriate if it allows him to elude accountability for the violence and his mania for power and control. Abusive men can be truly anguished, but the reality of anguish is not always accompanied by readiness to engage with counselors or clergy to change their behavior and their assumptions. The minister's task, said our text, is to become an ally of that part of the man that gravitates toward change. An ally of that part that gravitates toward change. They will not change overnight, though they might swear that they have, but they can gravitate toward change if enough sources are making clear that they cannot get away with their old ways. And that's the take-home phrase that I offer you today. Be ye allies of the part that gravitates toward change. There's a place for us in the framework of the picture that Hosea, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah put before us. We can take on the role of ministering to the victims, yes, and of ministering to the abuser too. What would it be like to imagine ourselves as God's pastor? To imagine ministering to the world that batters its poor with starvation, disease, violence, denial of education, economic hopelessness. How do we carry out such a ministry? We minister to an abusive God as we would minister to an abusive human. We hold accountable. We avoid easy forgiveness that allows the abuse to continue. We are allies of that part that gravitates towards change. We find the thread of value there and work to weave with it a new cloth. We befriend the aspect that can transform. Ministry for justice and security means alliance with that part of reality as a whole that gravitates toward change, toward justice, toward a true and healthy love, toward freedom, the relinquishing of dominating power and control. This means standing up to Yahweh, staring him in the eye and naming his abuse, naming and confronting the hurt, facing directly the sources of power, whether they be governments or corporations or natural disasters. It won't get better if we don't hold it accountable. As a minister would say to an abusive husband, I am judging your behavior, not your humanity. So we, as befrienders of a world our souls want to treat as a person, can say, in effect, I am judging your behavior, not your divinity. I am not going to desert you, but I am not going to excuse you either. This is not betrayal. Speaking the truth is the best way I can help you. Here, then, is a new psalm, a poem, a prayer, and a promise. You are my shepherd. You provide for me in so many ways. In you I have the still waters of peace. From you, security and love, beauty and abundance. My cup truly overfloweth. You also hurt so many humans and other animals and ecosystems. There is such cruelty in you. As you are my shepherd, so I will be yours. I will stand with you, and I will not enable your harming. I will hold you accountable. I will stand with you as an ally of that in you which gravitates towards change. This change will not be easy. This change is too fundamental to be possible without anguish. Universal peace and justice will take a long time. They will not be attained in my lifetime. They will in yours. I will be with you through the lifetime available to me as you have been with me. I commit my life to that. Together, we will take the next step. I insist. Amen.